The steam rose in soft curtains from the metal vats, blurring the edges of the morning. Trays rattled. Rubber soles squeaked. Somewhere, a radio whispered old soul music beneath the drone of refrigerators, like a memory refusing to disappear. In that half-light of a prestigious university's kitchen, where the day always began a little earlier than anywhere else, a woman in a white apron moved with the precise economy of someone who had learned to listen to time. Her name was Lila Mae Daniels, though most people never used it. Miss Lila, if they were kind. Ma'am, if they were tired. Excuse me, if they were hurried. She wiped tables, refilled the coffee urn, sorted the bakery case by instinct: muffins first, bagels second, cinnamon loaf on the middle tray, because students reached for sweetness without thinking. She had been here nearly a decade, and in that decade she had made herself small. Shoulders tucked, steps quiet, voice careful. This university, Briardale, the brochures said in serif fonts, had a way of making noise out of everything. The ambition of young people, the gust of ideas that slammed through lecture halls, the clatter of futures being assembled one elective at a time. But in the kitchen, at 7:14 a.m., the noise sounded like work. Miss Lila preferred that kind of noise, honest, straightforward, something you could put your hands on. She carried a bus tub to the professor's corner table, where the math faculty sent down their lanyards and their egos along with their mugs. They spoke a language that pushed at the air, etched it with symbols. It drifted through the cafeteria like steam, and then almost vanished, almost. Not for her. It fails at the third cycle, even with the correction term. Dr. Leonard Pierce, gray-bearded, glasses askew, stared at a page as if the paper were personally uncooperative. "We checked the boundary behavior," replied Doctor. Grace Huang, younger and sharp-eyed. "If you feed the raw data back in, the structure collapses. The problem isn't computational, it's the architecture." A third voice doctor, Mateo Alvarez, jacket still bearing yesterday's lecture room chalk dust, sighed into his mug. 3 days, 3 nights, and all we've got is a prettier way to say no. Miss Lila moved a little closer, collecting stray napkins. She didn't look directly at the paper, but she knew the rhythm. Matrices sliding into vectors, a turn of notation hinting at an inversion, a limit cycling like a heartbeat that wouldn't settle. The hum of refrigerators seemed to sync with the pattern. You could learn a person by the way they spoke. You could learn a problem by the way it breathed. She let the thought arrive without fanfare. A quiet courier from a world she hadn't sworn off so much as set down gently to carry something heavier. If the entry vector's assumption is wrong, don't push the wall, find the doorway. She didn't plan to speak. She almost never did. But the thought sat on her tongue and made its own decision. "If the second-order limit is framed wrong," she said softly, "your error might be imaginary. You could invert the vector in R4 and correct entropy downstream." 3 heads turned. The cafeteria had the awkward silence of a church when someone coughs during a prayer. Dr. Alvarez tilted his head. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Her face warmed. "Just thinking out loud, sir." Dr. Pierce gave a small smile that missed his eyes. "We've got ourselves a specialist on the breakfast line." The others chuckled, not cruelly, not exactly. It was the soft laughter reasonable people use to iron out the absurd. The radio hummed along to their politeness. Miss Lila's hands kept moving. She collected the napkins, nodded, kept her voice steady. "My mistake," she said, and walked away. She did not cry in the walk-in freezer or in the broom closet where the mop water always smelled faintly of lemon. She did not cry at all. But something did move, an old hinge inside swinging open just a fraction, the way a slightly warped door gives way when you stop yanking and start listening to where it sticks. In the afternoon lull, when the last of the breakfast plates had been washed and the gentle tyranny of lunch prep began, the math corner still bristled with pages and irritation. Laptops were open. Books stood like small fortifications. Miss Lila wiped a tray and kept the distance she had learned to keep. The voices rose and fell. "It's not just stubborn, Doctor," Huang said. "It's wrong, like we're insisting the world is shaped a certain way because it would please us if it were. Try flipping the second-order parameters," Miss Lila heard herself say. "And don't compensate for an error that's not there." She was standing a few chairs away, a damp towel in her hands. She had not decided to speak. She had simply spoken. Some truths behave like that. The silence this time was colder. Dr. Alvarez leaned back. Dr. Pierce rubbed his temples. A younger professor badge dangling from the lapel of an unwrinkled blazer folded his arms, as if bracing for a gust of wind. "Do you solve equations between mopping shifts, ma'am?" People laughed again, less softly. A neat pain moved through her chest and went quiet. She set the tray down and nodded as if someone had asked her to pass the salt. "Excuse me," she said. "I'll get out of your way." She returned to the dish station and worked until the work absorbed the moment, as work mercifully does. But all the way home, past brick buildings that made a show of their history, past a garden someone had arranged like a proof of patience, through a bus ride that rattled, and then up the stairs to her apartment, where the hall light flickered as if it had opinions. She carried a small, steady flame. The apartment had been designed for a life that didn't take up much room. A table for one. A stove that required careful negotiation. A lamp that did its best. She put the folded apron on a chair and for a while sat and listened to the building. A pipe knocking, a neighbor laughing through a wall, the upstairs vacuum trying to persuade the carpet. Then she stood and crossed to the closet. Behind a winter coat she did not need often, and a shoebox of photographs she could not bear to throw away. There was a spiral notebook with a bent corner and a sticker that had lost its gloss. MIT 84. The glue of the past held the plastic edge of memory in place. She opened it. The pages carried handwriting that had once been a girl's and then a young woman's, clean, deliberate, occasionally joyful when a line landed just right. There were diagrams that looked like prayers and notes that felt like music written down by someone who had learned to read her own heartbeat. She let herself sit down. The last time she had held the notebook, the kitchen timer had not been the clock she obeyed. It had been a hospital monitor, green lines stepping across a small screen over her mother's shoulder. The room had smelled like antiseptic hope and a kind of surrender she had never accepted, even as she performed it daily. She had brought the notebook to the hospital because math had always been the one thing that said, "If you hold me long enough, I will hold you back." But equations don't make coffee. They don't change sheets or slow the bright undoing of a mind. They don't remember for you when the person who taught you to remember forgets. Lila Mae had chosen. Or perhaps choice is too proud a word for what love requires when it reaches that particular crossroad. She had walked away from a life that applauded her and walked toward a life that needed her. The applause would have felt wrong anyway. Loud and thin in a room where a person you love calls you by the wrong name, and then one day calls you nothing at all. She traced a finger along a familiar argument in the notebook and laughed once, small and surprised, at how quickly the architecture of thought welcomed her home. Memory is strange. It preserves the paths we wore in ourselves, even when the world forgets to walk them with us. She turned to a blank page, That day's problem, the one in the cafeteria, the one that had made the room tighten around her, stood up again in her mind and waited. She tested a line. It held. She tested a second line. It resisted, but yielded when she changed the angle. The third line clicked into place with the quiet pleasure of a well-made drawer sliding true. There was nothing frantic about it, no operatic urgency, just a person and a pattern and a listening so deep it became a kind of love. At some point, the lamp settled into a steadier glow. Outside, the last of the neighborhood's noise rolled itself thin and then lay down. As night loosened around her, she spoke aloud, because the mind sometimes needs a voice to keep it company. "There you are," she said softly, as if to a friend who'd found the house without needing directions. "You were always there. Dawn isn't beautiful everywhere. In some places it just arrives without ceremony, a shift in temperature and an adjustment in expectation. On the campus, though, it had a way of dressing up. The bell tower did silhouette tricks. The trees pretended they had been painted. Old bricks posed like old actors. "Notice me," they seemed to say. "I've carried people you will never meet." Lila Mae crossed the quad while the world was still deciding which face to put on. She carried the notebook in the crook of her arm, not as a trophy, but as a talisman. The side door of the mathematics building was unlocked, because the building was confident of its own innocence. Hallways yawned. Light from paneled windows poured in like patient water. Room 2C smelled like whiteboard markers and old thought. She stood at the threshold for a breath and then went in, set the notebook on the front table, uncapped a blue marker, and let the board go blank, not because it was empty, but because it had been waiting. There are moments when doing feels like witnessing, and moments when witnessing is a kind of doing. She lifted the marker and wrote the first line. Framework. Not the mess, not the noise, not the impressive performance of cleverness framework. The thing that sits like a skeleton under the posture. Then a shift of variables, nothing dramatic, just a move that brought the problem into a light that forgave its shape. After that, an inversion, this goes here, that goes there, as if rearranging furniture in a room you finally decided to live in. Entropy correction. Name the chaos. Invite it to sit. Don't let it run the house. And then the conclusion. Not a drum roll or a flourish, but a door quietly clicking shut. 5 lines. That was all. Elegance has always favored brevity when it trusts itself. She capped the marker. She stood for a moment longer and felt a kind of peace that wasn't triumph and wasn't revenge and wasn't even justice. It was simply rightness. The room had offered a problem. She had offered it back to itself in a shape it could bear. That felt like love, too. Outside, the day had given up the mystery of the first light and settled into its obligations. People would arrive. The board would speak whether she asked it to or not. She tucked the notebook back under her arm and left the way she had come. Dr. Pierce walked into 2C balancing his coffee in one hand and a stack of despair in the other. He stopped. Then he walked to the first row because he did not trust himself to see what he was seeing unless he stood very close to it. He whispered, "No." And then, because honesty is a difficult habit to break, "Yes." By the time Dr. Huang arrived, he had texted her a photograph. She stood in front of the board and reached for the air as if she could touch the idea itself. Dr. Alvarez came next. 2 doctoral students hovered near the door, sensing a historical moment the way birds sense rain. "This isn't a guess, Doctor," Huang said. "This is correct. Who? Asked one of the students, because human beings prefer names. Who did this? Someone posted the photo on a platform that behaves like a rumor with good posture. A caption attached itself, as captions do, full of certainty disguised as a question. The Newton-Hayes equation solved? The internet began its usual dance: speculation, joke, skeptic, sincere, troll, kind stranger, patient explainer, echo. In the office, Dr. Pierce called the department coordinator. "Pull the footage from the hallway cameras," he said, suddenly aware of how that sentence sounded. "Please." They watched the video with a discomfort that wasn't only about privacy. At a little after 6, a small woman in a white uniform with a hairnet and a spiral notebook under her arm walked into the building the way a person walks into a place they long ago learned belonged to them in a way that did not require permission. She left 20 minutes later. No one else had entered before Dr. Pierce. "That's Miss Lila," the coordinator said, surprised but not surprised. The way a person is surprised to see thunder, but not surprised that the lightning happened. Kitchen. They sat with that information as if it were a guest who had broken the usual seating chart. Dr. Pierce took off his glasses. Dr. Huang set down her pen. Dr. Alvarez said very quietly, "We have been walking past a miracle every day." Campus rumor, unlike campus rumor elsewhere, wore tweed at Briardale. It moved professionally and filled email inboxes with neat subject lines. It spread through student group chats and faculty lounges and the bench outside the humanities building, where smokers formed a fellowship of mutual forgiveness. People tried not to rush to the cafeteria as if they were storming a stage, and then, of course, they rushed anyway. During the breakfast service, notes appeared near the register. "Are you the one? Please teach us. Is it true?" Lila Mae kept her eyes on the coffee urn, which needed her. She trusted things that needed her. She did not want to be photographed, and she did not want to be asked to prove something to someone who wasn't listening to what she'd already said without words on a whiteboard. Dr. Pierce asked for a meeting. She declined. Dr. Huang wrote her a letter, ink on paper as if to signal the seriousness of intent. She declined again. They tried once more, and this time she said yes with conditions. No cameras, no press, no questions about the proof. "You may listen to me," she said. "That is all." It was the bravest thing she had said in years, not because she feared them, but because she refused to perform for them. In a small office with a window that presented a very optimistic view of a parking lot, she sat across from 3 professors who had spent their lives in the company of ideas. Her notebook lay on the table as politely as an uninvited guest who nevertheless belonged. "You want to know who I am," she said. Her voice didn't tremble. Time had cured it of tremble. "Do not expect tragedy to sing for you. Sometimes pain does not cry out. It waits and asks what you will do with it." She told them about Alabama and a porch, about a father who fixed other people's cars so beautifully they ran better than they ever had, about a mother whose hands could make a dress from a pattern glimpsed in a shop window. She told them about a girl who found numbers the way some children find music, who discovered that certain problems quieted her in a way nothing else could. She told them about MIT and a piece of paper with her name and words like highest honors that mattered to the world but not enough to fix what would break. She told them about Alzheimer's, which steals furniture from the house of the mind and then returns to take the floors. She told them about the years that became tasks and the tasks that became love and the love that never resented itself even when the mirror suggested she had been erased. She told them how math never left, how it stayed in the corners like a faithful dog, how sometimes she would solve small proofs on receipts between shifts simply to remember the architecture of her own thinking. She told them the truth you can only tell when you have no intention of using it to buy anything. I did not stop being myself when I took a job that asked me to wear a hairnet. I simply kept being myself where fewer people looked. No one interrupted. The air in the room behaved itself. When she finished, Doctor. Huang had tears she did not wipe away because she did not want to rush the moment into tidiness. Dr. Alvarez looked out the window at the honest parking lot. Dr. Pierce said, "Thank you," and meant it. They offered her a platform. She declined. They offered her a title. She hesitated, then shook her head. They asked if there was anything the university could do. She considered and then said, "Learn how to listen to the people you do not see." And mean it. Briardale was practiced at ceremony. It could applaud thunder. But the next morning, what happened was not ceremony exactly. It began with one student standing in the cafeteria and clapping because he did not know what else to do with the way his chest felt. The people nearest him joined, as if afraid to leave him alone in a strange choice. Then someone at the back began, and then the line moved forward, and then the whole room stood. It was not polite. It was grateful. It had the sound of a place trying to say, "We're sorry," in a language that didn't have that phrase pronounced correctly. Miss Lila stopped with the coffee urn in her hands and had the sudden sensation that the world had tilted and found a new level place. A young woman freshman, glasses fogged slightly from the warmth of the room, notebook hugged to her chest, approached with a smile like a sunrise that had decided to be careful. "Miss Lila," she said softly, "please let us serve you today." The university president, who had once built a career on convincing important people that they were right to trust him, wrote a speech that did not embarrass itself and stood on a small platform later that day. "A new fellowship," he announced. "The Lila Mae Daniels Fellowship for Hidden Excellence." There were promises about outreach to staff, partnerships with community colleges, mentorship programs that would include non-faculty employees as teachers of life skills around patience, budgeting, conflict resolution, and practical wisdom. A committee would be formed because of course it would, consisting of a mix of students, faculty, and staff, chaired by someone who knew the difference between symbolism and work. He invited her to deliver a guest lecture the following week. She said no. He asked again. She said no. He asked a third time with less flourish, as if remembering he had a mother once, and she said yes on one condition. "I will not talk about equations. You have people for that. I will talk about what no one grades, how to listen to the person you have walked past." The auditorium filled before anyone turned on the lights. Security was gentle. Ushers were kind. Janitors sat in seats usually reserved for those who donate and then want to see what their money bought. Kitchen staff sat side by side like choir members who had been told to sing only if they wanted to, and they wanted to. Students stood at the back. Faculty stood along the walls, hands folded as if waiting to be measured. And perhaps they were. She walked out in a dark blue dress that did not make a speech about itself. Her hairnet had been replaced by a neat bun. She carried the spiral notebook, not because she planned to consult it, but because the hand knows what to do with a familiar object. She placed it on the lectern and looked at the room the way a person looks at a field they once worked, guessing where the stones are under the soil. "Good afternoon," she said. The room quieted in a way that was not silence. It was attention doing what it had been designed to do. My name is Lila Mae Daniels. Many of you know me as the person who hands you coffee when you are late to class or tired from being young. Some of you laughed at me last week. Some of you did not. You are all welcome here. She smiled. It wasn't a dare. It wasn't a reprieve. It was an invitation. When I was 19, a man told me my mind would change the field. That sounded like a lot to ask of a head that still needed to remember to eat. When I was 30, my mother forgot my name. I did not lose my mind. I found out where it lived. It lived in my hands cleaning a kitchen, in my feet moving towards someone who needed water, in my back lifting, and in my mouth saying, "I am here," every morning to a woman who had forgotten how to say it back. It also lived in the edges of paper where I worked out proofs during my lunch breaks. Because grace comes in odd shapes, and sometimes it looks like a solution arriving just when you need to remember you are more than what this world is willing to pay you for. She rested a palm on the notebook. The 5 lines you've seen are not about numbers to me. They are about respect. They are what happens when a person who has been ignored long enough decides not to be angry, not to be quiet, but to be precise. Precision is a kind of mercy. It gives the world back to itself in a shape it can carry. She told a few stories that did not make heroes out of the wrong people. The one about the student who thanked her for extra bacon the morning after her grandfather died, because grief makes salt taste different. The one about the night cook who could cut a tray of brownies into equal squares without a ruler every time, and how that was its own proof if you were paying attention. The one about the maintenance worker who knew the auditorium's leaks by sound and could say in a storm, "Seat row F, far left, keep a bucket ready," and how knowing your building like that is a form of scholarship. "What I want from this place is very simple," she said. "I want us to graduate people who recognize excellence when it is not wearing the clothes they expected. I want professors who can listen to the quiet voice at the edge of the room without irritation. I want students who understand that brilliance does not announce itself with a title. Sometimes it hands you coffee and wishes you a good day." She paused. "I am not here to be a symbol. Symbols are too easy to own and forget. I'm here to tell you that knowledge without humility is just ego doing tricks. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is thinking of yourself less. Make room. Ask better questions. And when you laugh at someone, ask yourself whether you did it because you were afraid of what it would mean if they were right." The applause gathered itself and then stood up. A student cried without embarrassment. A janitor wiped his eyes as if he'd gotten dust in them, and then decided not to pretend. Faculty members, honest with themselves in a way that made them tired and hopeful at once, clapped until their hands stung. In the weeks that followed, the fellowship became real in fits and starts, the way anything becomes real. Someone argued about budget lines. Someone else argued about application language because they wanted to make sure it didn't require the very credentials that had excluded the people it aimed to include. A schedule was drafted for lunchtime conversations led by staff, a dishwasher explaining kitchen flow, a groundskeeper teaching about soil, seasons, and patience, a residence hall custodian talking about conflict and quiet at 2 a.m. A portrait went up in the cafeteria. It was not large or grand. It showed a young woman in a black dress at a ceremony, a medal around her neck, and her eyes already looking beyond the photographer. Underneath it, a brass plate read, "Knowledge is knowing, wisdom is listening." A small group gathered to watch the custodian mount it on the wall. He stepped down the ladder and said, "Looks right there. and everyone nodded because some things just do. Miss Lila's name tag changed, reluctantly. Visiting Scholar, Advanced Mathematics. She wore it and her white kitchen shirt at the same time, quietly resisting the urge of institutions to file people into folders that do not have room for more than one truth. "It's comfortable," she told anyone who asked about the shirt. "And it reminds me where I come from." People began to accept that the answer was entirely sufficient. The campus learned, slowly, not to startle when they saw her in the math building. She did not hold office hours exactly, but sometimes she sat in room 2C at odd times, and the door would be open, and students would wander in with questions about proofs, and sometimes about life. She told them the same things in different words. Start by cleaning the table. You can't see a pattern if yesterday's mess is still pretending to be today's work. Don't mistake hurry for intelligence. Pick the right tools. Eat lunch. One afternoon, a young woman named Nia Brooks approached her with a notebook clutched as if it were a small, nervous bird. Nia had been part of the applause that morning weeks ago, the kind that starts with the whole body and only later reaches the hands. She stood in front of Miss Lila with a bravery that looked like worry. "Miss Lila," she said, "I think I've got something, but I don't know if it's real or if I just want it to be real." They sat by the window at a table that had seen thousands of trays and hundreds of whispered secrets. Nia opened the notebook. Lines scrolled like a careful river across the page. The idea wasn't wrong. It wasn't quite right yet either. It was a house with 2 rooms finished and the kitchen still in boxes. "You've got a first line," Lila said, tapping the top of the page where Nia had written page 1. "That's the best line I know. It proves you started." Nia exhaled in a way that made the windows fog. "Now," Lila continued, "let's clear the corner. This part is yesterday. You kept it because you liked how it looked. But you don't need it. See? If we take it away, the room makes more sense." They worked for half an hour. Nia's idea found its right angles. A small elegance grew where a mess had once lived. They laughed a little. Lila put the cap back on the student's pen and said, "You'll teach me something one day. I'll be here for that." At the end of the conversation, Nia asked a question she had been carrying like a coin she wasn't sure she should spend. "Do you ever wish you had stayed back then?" Lila looked out the window. A groundskeeper was adjusting a sprinkler, measuring the arc by instinct. "I wish," she said slowly, "that some things had been easier for my mother. But I do not wish a different life for myself. When you love someone the way I got to love her, it is all the mathematics I ever needed. And also," she added, smiling, "I still get to do math. The proofs learned to find me wherever I was, because universities are made of people, and people are made of stories that argue with themselves. Not everyone learned at the same speed." There were those who praised her loudly in public and in private felt the sting of having missed something they believed they had been trained to see. There were those who asked her to speak at events that did not deserve her time. She said no more often than she had learned to say yes, and people discovered that a boundary spoken gently still holds. There were also quiet conversions. A first-year lecturer stopped mid-sentence one morning and asked a facilities worker sitting in the back whether the new ventilation system made the room too cold for those who came in early and had to sit near the door. A senior researcher added a question to his weekly lab check-in, "Who haven't we asked yet?" and found his team's work improved. A dean rejected a proposal because it had the right project and the wrong spirit and sent it back with a note. Find the people who are doing this work already, pay them, and then ask them what the project should be. The whiteboard in 2C was not erased for a week. Someone had traced the proof in a copybook. Someone else had turned it into a poster. Someone had tried to make a t-shirt design and then thought better of it. The professors wrote a paper together. Pierce, Huang, Alvarez, and included a footnote so earnest it was almost a prayer. We are indebted to Lila Mae Daniels, whose clarity and generosity altered not only our thinking, but our practice. Any errors that remain are ours, and we hope we learn to be worthy of the lessons she has offered. Lila did not read the paper. She believed them without needing their sentences to be beautiful. She asked instead that the fellowship application include a line that made her smile every time she imagined it. Tell us about a time you learned from someone who did not owe you a lesson. The seasons rounded the campus. Leaves performed their brief opera and then folded. Students fell in love, changed majors, changed back, called home to say they were fine when they were not, and the kitchen kept producing meals that were better than any apology and almost as good as sleep. Lila adopted a cat that enjoyed watching birds and ignoring toys. She started walking after dinner, a slow circle that let the day move through her and leave. Sometimes, she stopped by room 2C when the building was empty and sat with the hum that rooms keep after people go home. It isn't silence. It is the sound of a space remembering what happened in it. She would stand at the board and not write anything at all and feel as complete as if she had. On a winter evening, she took the notebook out, not to write, but to remove a photograph that had lived in the back pocket for years, a picture of her mother at 23, eyes bright, standing in front of a borrowed bicycle. She placed it on the ledge beneath the board, a small altar to the grammar of love. You would have liked them, she said to the room, and to the woman in the photograph, and to herself. Even the ones who laugh first. You would have said, they'll learn. If they're lucky, they'll learn. If there is a moral to a life, it doesn't come at the end like a ribbon tied around a box. It reveals itself along the way, in decisions that look small until you sit quietly with them, and they explain what they have been holding up all this time. Lila Mae Daniels never became a celebrity. She did not want to. She became instead what she had always been, a person whose presence made difficult things simpler and loud rooms quieter. The fellowship funded a handful of brilliant, stubborn students every year, some in physics, some in food science, one in plumbing systems who redesigned dormitory valves so skillfully that the maintenance staff wrote his name on a sticky note and stuck it to a toolbox like a talisman. The lunchtime conversations continued. The portrait acquired fingerprints from students who touched the brass plate for luck before exams. The university, imperfect and earnest, grew a little more honest about who it was and who it wanted to be. One afternoon in spring, the bell tower paused mid-chime as if counting something complicated. The cafeteria windows were open. Nia Brooks, hair now braided back tight against exams, came running in with a grade report and a grin. "Miss Lila," she called. "It worked." Lila wiped her hands on a towel and took the paper and nodded as if the world had done what it promised. "Of course it did," she said. "You listened." They stood for a moment in the kind of pause that makes room for the future. The radio, faithful companion, found an old song and let it play from the beginning. Brilliance doesn't come wrapped in titles, uniforms, or offices. It shows itself wherever people do their work with care. Knowledge without humility is a stunt. Wisdom asks us to listen for the quiet person at the edge of the room and to make room when they speak. The measure of a great school or a great life is not only what we know, but whom we honor for knowing it. If you carry any power at all, use it to notice the people you've been walking past and to ask better questions. And if you've been overlooked, remember, your first line on the page is the bravest one. Keep writing.